Hello, is this Outside the Walls?
You are listening to the Outside the Walls podcast, thoughts and perspectives that go beyond the walls of the church, with writer and speaker Brandon Andress.
God has not answered my prayers, and it's in this uncomfortable place where we uncover the most difficult area of faith, which is many times too taboo, too controversial, or too difficult for people of faith to discuss. The cold hard fact is that there are prayers that God just doesn't answer. In fact, there are many prayers that God doesn't answer. And it can be frustrating and maddening and bewildering. It can push a person to the very edge of unbelief, sometimes even tipping them over the precipice of faith. The silence of God appears seemingly detached and indifferent to our pain, groans, and our needful cries for help, appearing to leave us as abandoned orphans, lost, alone, and destitute without any hope beyond ourselves. Over the last 19 years of my life, I have dealt with chronic body pain. Even as I speak these words, I feel physically worse than I have in my entire life. And while I've tried almost everything to alleviate this pain, I wake up with it each day and I carry it with me everywhere I go. God help me. I can identify with the cry of the psalmist in my suffering through unanswered prayer as he writes, "O Lord, heal me, for my bones are in agony, my soul is in anguish. How long, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, and deliver me. Save me because of your unfailing love." But in response to my pleas and my groaning, there is only silence and questions.
I haven't prayed in months.
Steve Austin, author of Catching Your Breath, The Sacred Journey from Chaos to Calm.
You know, I was taught things about prayer like this in Matthew 7:7. Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and the door will be opened. And I pictured God as this mix between Santa Claus and the genie in Aladdin's lamp. And I believed that if I did all the right things and followed after God's will, that God would somehow magically meet my every request. And then I became an adult and realized that God's not some beck and call girl, that you can't just walk out of the Chinese restaurant and rub Buddha's belly on the way out and somehow expect that things are just gonna supernaturally fall into place and that your whole existence is now gonna make sense and life is gonna be easy. It's just not true. George Orwell said in his essay, Pleasure Spots, "We live more in a world in which the lights must never go out. The music must always play, lest we should see where we are. Lost in a haunted wood. Children afraid of the dark who have never been happy or good." Brandon, what if a life of wholeness, completeness, and harmony in all things does actually take into account our pain and suffering? Surely it does, or we are beyond all hope.
It's easy to talk about life to the fullest, a life of shalom, when life is good, and when you physically, mentally, and emotionally feel well. But isn't it impossible when you have a debilitating disease, or when you're suffering from the excruciating pain of a physical illness or disease, or when you're losing your mental and physical capabilities, or when you're struggling through a physical or mental disability or illness? I confess that when I am in the most pain, I'm also at my worst. And it's really hard to admit that. For all the areas of my life that I most easily seek and reside in shalom, I'm still a student learning how to embody completeness, wholeness, and harmony in all things when I'm physically suffering. While it's easy for me to remember the big picture and keep my current condition in perspective, I too easily let my pain override my character and my disposition toward others, usually toward my wife and kids, and I devolve into a crumpled ball of impatience and frustration. It's certainly one thing to have idyllic notions of how life ought to be when life is good, but quite another when your body is in constant pain, when you feel mentally exhausted, and when your son reminds you that you forgot his blanket and cup of water downstairs after the nighttime prayer. Idealism has to have its limits, right? But what if we've had this thing wrong all along? What if a life of wholeness and completeness and harmony in all things actually takes into account our pain and our suffering? What if a life of shalom is able to transcend every degree of pain and suffering, every malady, every dysfunction, every frailty, and every disability? What if a life of shalom could not just be found in the most likely places, but found even more readily in the least expected places, like our pain, and through our unanswered prayers?
My very favorite, always on repeat song is called Weak Sometimes by Devin Ballroom. And here are the lyrics. You're put together. You're so well and put together that even on your tragic days, you seem fine. You try so hard to hide that there's a fight inside, but I can see it in your eyes that you're not fine. And whoever said it was wrong to be weak sometimes? To cry yourself to sleep and wake up with your tears barely dry. You might feel like you're dying, that the end is nowhere near in sight. But whoever said it was wrong to be weak sometimes? You say that pain just gets in the way. Just let it sit. It'll dissipate. You say that no one's had a better day by dealing with their shame. But whoever said it was wrong to be weak sometimes? To cry yourself to sleep and wake up with your tears barely dry. You might feel like you're dying, that the end is nowhere near in sight. But whoever said it was wrong to be weak sometimes?
The goal is not to be healed with enough faith. The goal is the journey of who we're becoming, in light of what we're suffering, in light of the pain we're experiencing, in light of what we're going through. And that is why we should never apologize for singing the praises of God in one breath and groaning in the next. Because there is shalom in this fractured place, and we hold both together within us in hope. I just attended the funeral of my 87-year-old uncle who died with Parkinson's disease. He had been a preacher almost as long as he had been alive, and the church that he started was the same church that I grew up in for the first 20 years of my life. I probably didn't agree with every doctrine of that church, and I didn't necessarily agree with every nuance of their theology, but man, my uncle loved people. The love of Christ radiated outward in his words and in his actions. He loved and cared for all of the people that he knew, and even people he didn't know. He was one of the most loving people I've ever met. The amazing truth is that love can cover a multitude of different doctrines and theologies, because it's ultimately about how much we love God and love others and ourselves. And that he did. And it was a beautiful thing to hear all of the stories of how he loved. Even when his health was deteriorating, even when he was in pain, even when his body continued to tremor from his disease, he loved God and loved everyone around him. He lived in the wholeness of the Christ. He resided in the completeness of the Christ. And in this harmonious relationship with the Christ was the deep well of God's goodness. It was his fullness and satisfaction, even while his body deteriorated and failed. Even while his body deteriorated and failed. That is what I want in my life. I want to experience and share a love that transcends my broken body, that reaches down deep into the well of God's goodness despite my pain and suffering, for it is in that place where we discover beauty, despite the wreckage.
I'm rolling down the hall, onto the psych ward praying, if you're there, help me. It was the act of choosing to live. Choosing not to try to die again. So in my talks and in suicide prevention workshops and self-care talks, we talk a lot about recovery. And I think the truth is that we're all recovering from something. I think that we are, each of us, choosing every day not to live in the graveyard of yesterday, but to shake ourselves loose, stand up, and try again, to breathe again. I think we are all Lazarus. And just because his heart stopped beating didn't mean his life was over. So you want to talk about prayer? I think all of life is a prayer. Every word that we speak, everything that we do is an act of worship. I think it's a declaration of who we are and how we value our own lives and what we want to give to the rest of creation. So as a father, each moment that I spend with my son, listening to him, pouring my hard-earned wisdom into him, laughing with him, teaching him, I think all of that is prayer. I believe that as I show up and I'm present with my children, that I am praying that they'll have a better childhood than I had. I believe that I am praying that they will feel safe and happy, healthy and whole, loved and at peace. When I pick up my little girl and I hold her close and I whisper, "You are so beautiful. I love you to the moon and back," I am praying, God, let her know her value. Let her know that her worth is found in who she is. Let my baby girl rest in the knowledge that her father accepts her, respects her, and cherishes her exactly as she is. That is prayer. And those prayers are answered. When I push the kitchen utensils aside and I grab my wife by the wrist and I spin her toward me and I look her in the eyes and I wrap her in this warm embrace, I am praying to the Almighty that my wife's heart will never feel the need to wonder. When I whisper in her ears, "I love this life we're creating together," that is a prayer. When I wash the dishes, or I take out the trash, or I bring her her first cup of coffee in the morning, all of those things are acts of worship and devotion, because I am in love with the divine beauty that inhabits her soul. And in my wife's eyes, I've met God. So I don't always have the right words. I haven't mastered the King James language of prayer, but I believe that everything we do is prayer. When we treat other people with kindness and dignity, that's our souls singing to God, we belong together. We belong to God. When you show up and you secretly pay your neighbor's power bill, you're offering a cup of cold water in the name of Jesus. And when you gather on a Sunday afternoon to feed the homeless, that's your soul crying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Maybe you sit through an afternoon dance recital, or you sweat in the middle of the day at a baseball tournament for your kids. You are praying that your children would know just how priceless they are to you and to God. I believe everything is prayer.
God, we praise you for your goodness, but we also groan longingly and hopefully, looking toward a future in which every tear will be wiped away, every heartache will be healed, and every burdened body will be lifted. But for today, we groan and travail together, seeking the shalom of the Christ. Even while these bodies exist in dysfunction, disability, debilitation, and disorder, we pray for your deep well of goodness to be our satisfaction. For when we are prospering, let us be satisfied in your fullness. And when we're in need, let us be satisfied in your fullness. For when we have plenty, let us be satisfied in your fullness. And when we are in want, let us be satisfied in your fullness. For when we are well fed, let us be satisfied in your fullness. And when we are hungry, let us be satisfied in your fullness. For when our bodies are healthy and functional, let us be satisfied in your fullness. And when our bodies are unhealthy and broken, let us be satisfied in your fullness. For when our minds are clear and balanced and thinking rightly, let us be satisfied in your fullness. And when our minds are cloudy and imbalanced and confused, let us be satisfied in your fullness. Father, let us be patient, content, and joyful examples of what it looks like to bear the tension of our bodily pain and suffering while becoming the wholeness, completeness, and harmony of your shalom. Let us experience and share your love that transcends our broken bodies. Work in and through our every weakness, our every physical, mental, and emotional dysfunction, our every pain, and through our suffering to reveal that which is eternal and valuable. Amen. In both my book, Beauty and the Wreckage, Finding Peace in the Age of Outrage, and Steve's book, Catching Your Breath, The Sacred Journey from Chaos to Calm, we take seriously mental and physical well-being. If you need medical, mental, or emotional counsel and/or treatment, please get it. God can work through us even when we seek treatment for physical, mental, or emotional illness. And doing so does not make any of us less faithful or less trusting in the power of God. Conversely, denying yourself medical, mental, or emotional support does not make you more faithful or more trusting in the power of God. It makes you foolish. Steve, the title of your book is Catching Your Breath, The Sacred Journey from Chaos to Calm. Who is this book for?
This is my favorite question. Basically, this book is for anyone who's ever felt overwhelmed. If you have lived through a moment that has knocked the wind from your lungs and left you gasping for air and hope, you're going to connect with this book on a deep level. Because the truth is that in the midst of a sometimes chaotic life, that's normal. It's normal to feel breathless. So this book is the journey that I've taken to find and cultivate inner peace. So who's it for? It's a book for Christians, and it's a book for atheists and agnostics and Protestants and Catholics and non-religious Jews and mystics and blacks, whites, straights, gays, transgenders, and everyone in between. This is not a book where I argue sacred versus secular or Sunday versus Monday. In this book, I'm far less concerned with your need for theological rightness, and I'm much more passionate about our desperation for kindness. Kindness toward ourselves and kindness toward our neighbor. I want to, in the pages of this book, encourage everyone who shows up from whatever walk of life to keep holding on in the constant push and pull of a life that is rarely ever easy.
I would say this book is hard to categorize. There is spirituality, self-help, memoir, among other things. How would you categorize this book?
To make it easy, it probably does fall under spirituality more than any other category, but this book it's about so much more than just life coaching advice. Yes, it's in there. Yes, there are self-care tips and tricks, but I believe it's more than the typical self-help book. This is a holistic approach to wellness for wounded hearts. If your soul has been wounded by your family, by your community, your church, if you've completely dropped the ball and blown it, and your soul has been wounded, this is a book, I hope, that is going to feel like Grandma's quilt. And you just wrap it around you, and it whispers, it's going to be okay.
Okay, the sacred journey from chaos to calm. Could you define those two terms?
Oh, man, yeah. Chaos depends on the individual and their specific journey. Chaos is different for all of us. Sometimes chaos means stress or breathlessness, anxiety, busyness, shame, performance, guilt, secret keeping. Chaos can be a million different things. And then calm. Calm for me is inner peace. It's this belief that our story isn't over. Calm is a stubborn refusal to give up. Sometimes calm is just a deep breath. It is this knowing in your gut that the chaos won't last forever. So I say in the book, one of my favorite lines is, to carry inner calm is to choose kindness over judgment, compassion instead of criticism, and optimism instead of negativity within ourselves.
Thank you for listening to Outside the Walls podcast. You can reach Brandon with thoughts and comments on Twitter at Brandon Andress or his website, brandonandress.com. We would love your 5-star ratings and reviews on iTunes, and please share this with a friend.